Next we have Professor David Butterfield, Professor of Latin here at Ralston College.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are here in this particular room right now because we are collectively on a mission. And I say that because we are Ralston College. And it's that word college that, in my remarks today, I'm going to focus on. Because college isn't some fancy borrowing from French collège. It's a word that actually goes right back to antiquity. College comes from Latin collegium. And that word literally means people united on a shared mission. The con is the togetherness, but the leg or legare, is to send someone out on a mission where you entrust in them your hopes. A colleague is someone along your side who is part of that shared mission together. So we really are here in this room because we have a shared hope. Now, in the few minutes that I have, I'm going to trace the history of collegiate communities in order to tease out some of the fundamental values which makes Ralston what it is, and indeed, as James just said, a place to which I am devoting my life, leaving behind an ancient university of colleges for this particular one. So if we cast our minds back to the 5th century and the fall of Rome, it really does look as though the world is going to change forever. Those two most important elements of Roman culture, on the one hand, the slow evolution and advancement of Greco-Roman culture, be it literature, philosophy, art, architecture, technology, all of that looked as though it could fade into ash. But also, the growing, burgeoning church in the West is also jeopardized by the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century. But it's at this moment of crisis that phthisis really does happen, and there's two individuals I would like to mention very briefly. Both born in the late 5th century, at the time the Roman Empire collapses, St. Benedict and Cassiodorus. Very briefly, Benedict looks at the monastic community. A monk, a monachos, lives alone. And he sees that for the future of Christianity, there needs to be communion. There needs to be a sense of community. And Benedict literally comes up with the rules, the Benedictine rule, as to how a community of Christians can live corporately and cure their souls collectively. He creates the monastery as we know it in 529 at Monte Cassino. That Benedictine rule quite literally shapes the next half a millennium of monastic life. So that was his response. Cassiodorus, about a generation later, down in Esquilace in southern Italy, he too sees that we need to form a community, but he also sees that books, that literature, that the written word is essential to those communities. And he writes this great work, the Institutions, the Institutiones, which has a huge amount of material in it about how we can't just be a spiritual community, we need to be a scholarly community. We need to read, we need to write, we need to discuss. And those two figures, literal individuals in the early 6th century, set the seeds for what keeps alive the West in the Western Roman Empire. If we fast forward to Charlemagne, he is able to do what he does, namely reform Western Europe, by drawing upon the monastic tradition, on the cathedral schools which are starting to form, and changing the palace schools from teaching warfare to teaching culture and the liberal arts. And he summons a man called Alcuin from York in England, who himself fuses the tradition of Irish monasticism with the new revival of papal Christianity in England. Why am I saying all of this? Because a few individuals at points in time looked ahead and were able to draw together the threads, tie them together, and pass them on. The next moment in my long arc is the 11th century. But it's only at this point, a millennium ago, that the university was born. Simply wasn't a thing before that, but it's a European invention of the 11th century. And differently from what I've been saying, it wasn't formed by someone sitting down and saying it would be a great thing to have a university. It was an organic emergence of scholars heading to a given town where a scholarly community was starting to emerge and forming a guild. That word universitas doesn't mean a place where you universally study all of learning. No, universitas means oneness, forming a community of a unique body. And in Bologna first, and then in Paris, and in Oxford, and then in Cambridge, within a very quick period of time, this idea of a body of scholars coming together, learning the liberal arts as one, and then saying you can now go out into the world and hand on that learning, spreads like wildfire. And I'd like to focus on Oxford and Cambridge in particular, because they make the crucial step to what I'm talking about, namely the college. So Oxford's founded at some point in the 12th century, Cambridge in the early 13th century. And fundamentally, a university has no campus, because it's a collection of humans engaged in shared study, just in a place. There are no buildings. You meet in a church to read together. You might meet outside. There is no physical entity. And what was starting to happen is that the students descending on the places that had universities were having to live anywhere and getting caught up in the mundane distractions of city life. And it simply wasn't good enough. So specifically in the 13th century, wealthy philanthropists, obviously Christian individuals, see that scholarship and community needs to be raised to a higher level. And an individual called Walter de Merton in the 1260s comes up with the idea of a college. And what's so crucial in Walter's thinking is that he looks back to the monastic communities. He sees around him the flourishing Augustinians, Franciscans, Dominicans, Carmelites, Cistercians. All of these religious orders are flourishing. But he sees that in order to have breadth of study and of scholarship, we need a new community not tied to a religious order. And he explicitly comes up, a bit like Benedict, with a set of rules, a set of criteria about how a true scholarly community should be. And he takes the spirit of communal monasticism, but frees it by allowing for broader study and broader intellectual inquiry and debate outside the confines of the church. Now, I'm not going to piece together the following, 900 years from that period to now, because we've reached the point that matters for Ralston College. A college is a physical, in-person gathering of people united by a shared mission. And that shared mission is something rooted in stability of higher ideals. Of course, for most of the history of the university, that higher ideal was Christianity, and scholarship happened under the aegis of God. But we've become unrooted, uprooted, floating around like flotsam on the sea of learning. If we look at the ancient colleges of America, for instance, if we look at Harvard, we see its motto, veritas, truth. We look at Yale, we see one-upmanship, lux et veritas, light and truth. We look at Princeton, Dei sub numine viget, it thrives under the power of God. We look at Oxford, Dominus illuminatio mea, the Lord is my illumination. Well, these are now empty slogans in the colleges that were founded in the conviction that they were divine truth. So I'm sad to say that the remarks of James are entirely true about the failures of higher education as we have it. And what was so exciting to me and so appealing about Ralston College is that although it's new, it's an entirely new institution emerging but 3 years ago, it is built in the spirit of that tradition that I sketched out. And what does that mean? That means people come from all around the country, not just to study together, which you could do anywhere, but to live together. And not to study for a livelihood, for a living outside in the real world, but to live as study. The study is their communal life. And it's my intense hope that throughout today, those of you who are visiting will speak to the students and see that they are genuinely living embodiments of the scholarly life, living in shared accommodation, living by a communal set of values, under a given set of structures, but with the freedom to say, to think, to debate whatever they like. But fundamentally, people are drawn to Ralston because it adds up to more than the sum of its parts. That college is indeed united on a higher mission. So I'll close my remarks there, simply wanting to underline the fact that, amazingly, to my amazement, half a decade ago it didn't seem possible. Here in 2025, a college that believes in the crucial essentials of a shared educational mission has come into being. So I'm delighted, not just that I am part of the mission today, but that you have spent time to come and hear and indeed see more about what we're doing here and now. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.